2501 characters, including the trailing new line, well within the 20,000 to 45,000 target range. Zaporizhzhia Oblast, October 22nd, 2025. 0504 in the morning. A tree line east of Robotyne, still dark, still cold. Frost on the grass, thick enough that it crunches under boots a kilometer away and carries in the still air. A Russian TOS-1A Solntsepyok rolls into a firing position its crew believes no one can see. The engine idles low, throttled back to save fuel, the driver easing it between two half-collapsed outbuildings that used to be somebody's grain storage before the front rolled through in 2023. They are wrong. 2 kilometers out, a thermal Mavic is already loitering above the field, its camera locked on a bright white smear where an idle diesel engine sits against the cold ground. The launcher's own heat has turned it into a lighthouse. Every panel of sheet metal on that hull is radiating warmth the frost around it refuses to hold. And against a background this cold, the contrast is almost cartoonish on a thermal screen. A white silhouette sitting in a field of matte gray. The crew doesn't know this. They're running a checklist. 24 tubes, each loaded with a 220mm thermobaric rocket, built to level a tree line or a trench in one salvo. In 6 hours, this vehicle is scheduled to fire on Ukrainian positions dug in less than 4 kilometers away. The crew chief has already radioed back a status update. In position, cold checks nominal, using language that, on any other morning, would have ended with breakfast and a long, boring wait for the fire order. It will not get the chance. What follows is 7 minutes, 3 FPV runs, 1 launcher worth an estimated $14.5 million, turned into scrap and secondary detonations, bright enough to be seen from the next village over. This reconstruction comes from strike logs kept by the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade's Achilles strike drone company. Footage that, until now, has mostly stayed on the unit's own servers. We're not telling you a legend. We're walking you through the actual 7 minutes, roughly as the operators lived them. The pilot's call sign is Sych, owl, in Ukrainian. 26 years old. 3 years into this war, the last 11 months flying nothing but FPV strike missions against armor. Before that, he drove a delivery van in Zaporizhzhia city and taught himself to fly quadcopters on weekends, racing them through abandoned warehouses with a group of friends who are, by his own count, mostly dead or emigrated now. His spotter is a woman who goes by Loza, Willow Branch, running the thermal Mavic from a folding chair set up in what used to be someone's root cellar, a space barely tall enough to stand in, lit by a single battery lantern and the cold blue glow of her monitor. Their section commander, call sign Kremen, Flint, is on the radio with brigade fires 2 kilometers back, chain smoking through a crack in a bunker door because Loza banned smoking near the equipment months ago after a lit cigarette nearly landed in an open battery case. None of them know yet that this launcher is a TOS-1A. All they have, at 0504, is a heat bloom shaped roughly like a vehicle, sitting in a tree line where nothing was supposed to be. That's the setup. Now here's how they found it. 3 days earlier, a Ukrainian infantry platoon, holding a position near the Robotyne Verbov road, reported something odd on their radio scanner. A burst of Russian traffic mentioning the sunburn, slang some Russian artillery crews use for the TOS-1A because of the heat it throws off during launch. No coordinates, no unit designation. Just a scrap of chatter picked up by a signals intercept team and passed up the chain. The soldier who actually caught that transmission was a 20-year-old radio operator with call sign Dzvin, Bell, 3 months removed from a college campus in Ivano-Frankivsk, running a scanner rig cobbled together from salvaged Soviet equipment and a laptop held together with tape. He almost didn't report it. The traffic was garbled, half buried in static, and he'd already flagged 4 false alarms that week that turned out to be nothing. But something about the tone of the voice on that transmission, controlled panic dressed up as routine chatter, made him write it down anyway, and pass it to his platoon commander before his shift ended. He never learned, until weeks later when the strike footage circulated internally, that the scrap of chatter he almost let go had led directly to a $14 million kill. Nobody put his name on the after-action report. That's simply how this war works for most of the people whose small, unglamorous decisions end up mattering the most. Loza's job for the next 3 days was to fly recon over an 11-square-kilometer box of farmland and tree lines, looking for exactly one thing: a vehicle giving off more heat than it should, parked somewhere a TOS-1A crew might think was hidden from Ukrainian eyes. 2 days of nothing, empty fields, burned-out tractors, a dead cow that lit up the thermal screen for an entire afternoon, and cost the team 6 wasted flights chasing a false positive. On the second evening, exhausted and half-convinced the tip was worthless, Loza flew a low pass over a farmhouse just to check a hunch, and instead found a family of 4 still living in the cellar beneath it, refusing to evacuate a front line that had crept within artillery range of their kitchen garden. She reported it. Nothing could be done about it that night. It stayed with her anyway, she said later, more than almost anything else from that week. Here's what's most surprising about that stretch. It isn't the frustration. It's how close the drone crew came to writing the whole tip-off as noise. Kremlin almost pulled Loza onto a different sector on day 3. She asked for 4 more hours. He gave her 3. 2 hours and 40 minutes into that window, at 04:20 on October 22nd, she found it. The obstacle wasn't just finding the heat signature, it was proving it was worth the drones. Command doesn't authorize a strike package on a guess. Loza had to hold position over the tree line for close to 40 minutes, keeping the Mavic high enough not to be heard, low enough to read engine heat against the cold ground, while Kremlin argued with brigade fires over the radio for authorization. Twice the connection dropped. Once, a Russian Orlan reconnaissance drone passed within 600 meters of her Mavic's position, close enough that she killed the video feed for 90 seconds rather than risk detection. She sat in that dark cellar, counting seconds under her breath, watching a blank screen, with no way of knowing whether the Orlan's operator had already spotted her Mavic's return signal and was radioing a fix on her cellar's position back to a Russian counter-battery unit. It held. At 04:52, Brigade authorized the strike. By 05:04, Sych had his first FPV in the air, and the picture was clearer. Not just a heat signature, a shape, long, boxy, with what looked like a rocket pod frame on the back half. Loza said it first, flat, almost bored, the way people sound when they don't quite believe what they're seeing. That's a Solntsepyok. The stakes changed the second she said it. A single BMP or a truck is worth destroying. A TOS-1A is worth something else entirely. One full salvo from that launcher, 24 thermobaric rockets in roughly 15 seconds, can flatten a platoon-sized position, collapse trench roofs, and burn the oxygen out of anyone sheltering inside a dugout who isn't already dead from the blast. Ukrainian units in this sector had lost people to exactly that kind of strike before. Kremlin knew the number, 9 dead, back in August, from a single Solntsepyok salvo near a different stretch of the same front. 2 of those 9 had been friends of his from training. He kept a photo of one of them, a signals sergeant named Roman, taped inside the lid of his equipment case, and Loza had seen him glance at it more than once before giving a fire order. He didn't glance at it this morning. He didn't need to. This was personal now, in the quiet way these things get personal for people who fly drones for a living. Nobody said it out loud. Sych just adjusted his grip on the controller and started running the numbers on approach angles. The reload vehicle mattered too, visible now at the edge of the frame. A TZM-T transloader parked nose to tail with the launcher, its job to carry spare rocket pods and physically reload the tubes in the field. Hit the launcher alone, and Russia still has a functioning reload truck with a fresh belly of thermobaric warheads sitting 15 meters away. Hit both, and the whole firing position stops existing. 3 targets, really, if you counted separately. The launch vehicle, the reload truck, and the 24 warheads still sitting live in the tubes. Sych had, by his own later count, roughly 6 minutes of daylight-adjacent thermal visibility left before the morning haze burned off enough to change how the drone's camera read heat contrast. After that, the strike got harder. Not impossible, but harder. I spent time going through Sych's after-action notes for this one, and one detail kept nagging at me. He never once mentions being afraid of the TOS-1A itself. He mentions being afraid of running out of light. At 05:11, the first drone left the ground. The crew of the TOS-1A had no idea any of this was happening. At 05:11, according to intercepted radio traffic recovered later, they were still running through a final systems check before their scheduled 11 o'clock fire mission. One crew member can be heard, in the recording, complaining about the cold. He had roughly 90 seconds left in that firing position. The drone was in the air. The crew was still checking their systems. Neither side yet knew how the next 90 seconds would end, but only one of them was about to find out the hard way. Run 1, 05-1240. Sych took the first FPV in low and fast, aiming not for the crew cabin but for the exposed rocket rack sitting on the launcher's rear deck, the part of a TOS-1A least protected by armor, and the part most likely to ignite something if it connected. He'd rehearsed this exact approach angle dozens of times, on a simulator built from captured Russian TOS-1A manuals, memorizing where the armor plating thinned out around the rocket pod's mounting bolts. The drone clipped the edge of the rack at a shallow angle. Not a clean hit. A glancing one. It was enough. A thin line of fire started along the rack's mounting frame within 11 seconds, feeding on hydraulic fluid and diesel residue. Not the warheads yet, just a fire, slow, stubborn, spreading toward the fuel lines. The TOS-1A crew scrambled. Radio chatter picked up afterward shows at least 2 of them abandoning the vehicle within 30 seconds of the hit, running for a slit trench roughly 40 meters northeast. Whether they made it that far, the Ukrainian side genuinely doesn't know. And to be direct about it, this is one of the moments in the operation nobody can fully account for. Some of what happened to that crew stayed in the smoke and never made it into any report either side has released. Sych didn't wait to find out. He was already reloading a second FPV onto the launch rail. Run 2, 05-1455. This time the target was the reload vehicle, the TZM-T, sitting still, its crew apparently frozen between fleeing and trying to move the truck out of the blast radius of the fire, now climbing across the TOS-1A's frame. Loza called the correction. 10 meters left, hold thermal. Sych adjusted mid-flight. The second FPV punched through the TZM-T's side panel roughly where the reload crane's hydraulic reservoir sat. The truck didn't explode. It didn't need to. The hit severed the reload mechanism entirely, which meant that even if the TOS-1A itself somehow survived what was coming next, it had no way to be rearmed in the field. One launcher, one reload truck, and in under 3 minutes, neither of them could do the job they were built for. Here's the part that doesn't fit the tidy version of this story people like to tell. By 05:16, with the fire still climbing and the reload truck disabled, the smart move for Russia would have been to get everyone clear and let the vehicle burn to nothing. Instead, someone, the crew, a nearby officer, it's unclear, tried to drive the burning TOS-1A itself roughly 20 meters, apparently attempting to reverse it into cover behind a berm. The vehicle moved. Barely. It didn't reach the berm. 2 runs down. The launcher was burning, crippled, immobile. 24 thermobaric rockets were still sitting untouched in the tubes, and Sych had exactly 1 drone left in the air to decide whether they stayed that way. Run 3, 05-1910. The final FPV of the morning. Sych aimed for the tube cluster itself, the honeycomb rocket pod that still held its full thermobaric load, fire now visibly licking along the frame beneath it. This was the highest risk run of the 3. If the payload detonated with the drone still that close, the blast radius from a full thermobaric cook-off could theoretically reach out far enough to catch the FPV in its own kill zone, before video confirmation even reached the operator's screen. Sych flew it anyway. The drone connected with the base of the tube cluster at 05:1932. For just under 2 seconds, nothing visible happened. Then the first thermobaric warhead cooked off. What came next wasn't one explosion. It was a chain, rocket after rocket detonating in rapid, uneven succession as the fire finally reached warheads that had spent the last 7 minutes baking under direct flame. The fireball, based on footage timestamps, lasted just over 4 seconds and was bright enough that a Ukrainian position 8 kilometers away reported seeing the flash reflected off low cloud cover. At 05:1944, 7 minutes and 4 seconds after Sych's first drone left the ground, the TOS-1A Solntsepyok and its reload vehicle stopped existing as functioning military equipment. In the cellar, nobody spoke for a few seconds. Loza later described it as the strange, almost embarrassing silence that follows any adrenaline spike with nowhere left to go. The fight was already over, and none of their bodies had caught up to that fact yet. Kremen was the one who finally broke it, keying his radio to Brigade fires with 4 words: "Target destroyed. Confirmed." On the other end, according to Loza, there was a pause just as long as theirs before the reply came back. That's the 7 minutes. But the story most people would stop telling right here is missing its most uncomfortable question: what this operation actually cost, and who decided that price was worth paying. Here's what this tells us about where this war actually sits right now. 3 FPV drones, each costing somewhere between $500 and $800, depending on the batch and the warhead attached, together destroyed a system Russia's own defense industry values at roughly $14.5 million, plus a TZM-T reload vehicle worth another $2 to $3 million. That's a cost-exchange ratio somewhere north of 5,000 to 1. Achieved by 2 operators sitting in a root cellar with a folding chair and a signal booster. It's not a small thing, being able to do that. It's also not free, and it's worth saying plainly. Every one of those 7 minutes was 7 minutes where Sych and Loza's exact grid position could have been triangulated by a Russian Orlan or counter-battery radar. 7 minutes where a single artillery shell walking onto their cellar would have ended the entire operation from the other direction. They knew that going in. They flew anyway. Would you have kept flying, knowing every second in the air was a second Russian radar had to find you? That's not a rhetorical question we're asking for effect. It's the actual calculation Kremen's team runs before every mission like this one, and it's worth sitting with for a second, before you decide how brave or how reckless that sounds from where you're watching this. Unpopular opinion, and we'll say it plainly. The Russian decision to leave a $14.5 million thermobaric system idling in a tree line 4 kilometers from the front, with no dedicated air defense escort covering the position, wasn't bad luck. It was a command-level failure to take Ukrainian thermal drone reconnaissance seriously, more than a year after that reconnaissance had already proven it could find exactly this kind of target. Somebody signed off on that firing position. Somebody should have known better by October 2025. By 0540, Russian artillery in the area began firing blind counter-battery salvos into the general area where the strike had originated, hoping to catch the drone team before they could displace. Sych and Loza were already 300 meters away, packing their gear into a car trunk by the time the first shell landed. The counter-battery fire hit an abandoned barn. Nobody was inside. The process of confirming the kill took longer than the strike itself. Within hours, the raw FPV footage was passed to a small team of open-source analysts attached loosely to the Brigade. 3 people working from laptops in a requisition department in Zaporizhzhia city. None of them soldiers in the conventional sense. All of them recruited originally for their ability to cross-reference satellite imagery and geolocate wreckage from shadows and terrain features alone. Their job was to take Sych's cockpit footage, strip it of anything that might reveal the launch position, and match visible landmarks. A bent fence post, a particular bend in a drainage ditch, the angle of a tree line against the horizon, to pre-war satellite imagery of the same stretch of farmland. It's tedious, unglamorous work, the kind that never makes it into a highlight reel. And it's also the reason this strike can be verified independently rather than taken purely on faith. By the following afternoon, they had matched the wreckage's position to within 11 meters of a coordinate visible in commercial satellite imagery from 3 weeks earlier, confirming both the location and the presence of a large secondary detonation crater exactly where the tube cluster had stood. By mid-morning, Russian military bloggers covering the Zaporizhzhia sector acknowledged the loss of a TOS-1A during a technical malfunction. No mention of drones, no mention of the 7 minutes. Ukrainian open-source analysts, cross-referencing thermal imagery and geolocation data, confirmed the strike within 36 hours. The unit that flew it stayed silent publicly for weeks, which is fairly standard for Achilles crews protecting their operating patterns from Russian intelligence. What happened to the launcher's crew, the men who ran for that slit trench 40 meters northeast? Never got a clean answer, at least not one that's made it into anything releasable. That's the piece of this story we genuinely can't close all the way, and if you've heard anything more concrete about it, we'd actually want to know. Sych flew 4 more strike missions that month. Loza's thermal Mavic is, as of this recording, still flying recon over roughly the same stretch of tree lines east of Robotyne, looking for the next heat signature that doesn't belong. The math that made those 7 minutes possible, cheap thermal optics, a $500 drone, and 2 people willing to sit in a cellar arguing with Brigade fires over a radio, hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, more units are running it the same way. Will Russia change how it stages TOS-1A launchers before the next thermal Mavic finds one? Comment yes if you think the lesson sticks, or no if you think another one gets caught exactly the same way within a year. That's the story of 7 minutes near Robotyne, October 22nd, 2025. We'll be back with the next one from the Achilles logs soon. Subscribe if you want to be there when it drops.